This is Election Connection, Western Connecticut State University's live news and election coverage for 2020. I'm Gordon Mochio. Tonight, we're looking at this year's election and what it means for Connecticut and the nation.
And I'm Sequoia Lowe. We are streaming live over YouTube, WCSU Election Connection, wcsu.edu/live, and WXCI 91.7 FM Danbury. You can also tweet us at ElectionCT.
Thank you, Sequoia, and I am Dustin Martin. In addition to the election, we are also going to be discussing the state of COVID-19 on a national as well as a local level. We'll also be covering stories about technology, culture, and current events.
Yes, we're going to have a very jam-packed show for you guys this evening, and it is going to be great. And let's start discussion with our first topic, which is Trump's response to the 2020 election. So, Trump is not taking the response to the election very kindly. He is currently in lawsuits with major swing states regarding the votes and regarding the situation regarding new President-elect Biden. Sequoia, how do you think that this could pan out in the near future with all the lawsuits going on?
Well, you know what, Gordon? We have seen a lot of lawsuits filed by the Trump campaign for sure, but very few of them have gotten anywhere. Many have been more or less laughed out of court. So I'm not sure that we're going to see the Trump campaign succeed in their efforts to sway the results of the election for Trump, but I am still concerned given how many Trump supporters do still side with the president here and essentially basically believe that Trump has won the election. I'm concerned that this could lead to enormous civil unrest, but for the time being, I'm looking at President-elect Biden taking office in January.
Yes, because as everything is looking right now, it is going to happen for certain. Dustin, what is your take on everything regarding going on right now with the lawsuits panning out in the swing states?
Well, this is just certainly entirely unprecedented. So where this will go is totally uncertain because for every race, even the closest of races, even 2016, when Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, she still conceded the election. So this is the first time where we are going to have trouble with the transition of power. The lawsuits, I don't believe, will go anywhere, and President-elect Joe Biden will be the 46th president of the United States.
Yeah, and calling in now, we have our field reporter, Jacob Schultz, to add more commentary to this conversation.
Hi, Gordon. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you, Jacob?
I'm great, thanks. So the topic of President Trump and his administration's reaction to the 2020 presidential race is certainly an interesting one. President Trump's administration has filed lawsuits in all major closely contested swing states. These include Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Nevada. And so far, the Trump campaign has received very few legal victories in this battle. Now, he's gotten one or two smaller ones in Pennsylvania for sure, and possibly in Georgia as well. Possibly Arizona or Nevada still remains to be seen. But by and large, a lot of these cases have been dismissed. And it's not looking great for President Trump. This has led him to start criticism in his supporters and in his voting base of the software called Dominion. Now, Dominion is software used to assist in ballot counting in many states. And President Trump has gone after this with very little evidence, saying that it is a fraudulent service and that it's responsible for flipping votes that were for him to being for Joe Biden. Now, the Department of Homeland Security Cybersecurity Agency described our most recent presidential election as probably the most secure in the nation's history. So we're seeing an interesting dynamic here between what President Donald Trump is trying to get his supporters to subscribe to and some of the other facts that are coming out from other sources. Now, obviously going forward, it remains unlikely that these legal battles, even if President Trump were to flip one or two swing states, which is possible. For example, in Georgia, the margin of votes is so small that a recount could possibly lead to a Trump victory there. But even if one or two things like that were to happen, it really won't swing the election itself back in favor for President Trump. There's just not enough electoral points for him to gain. interesting to see how the Trump campaign and administration deals with that inevitability going forward. But that's certainly what it's looking like.
Yeah, it seems it. So to ask you a question, Jacob, based on the research that you've done, do you see the potential of Trump conceding in the near future and his campaigns pulling back a little bit? Or do you see him just going full swing ahead, keep going with the lawsuits, keep recounting ballots, and keep pushing with the court cases?
So there's a couple things that we have to take into consideration here. Now, obviously, we are familiar with President Trump's, I guess you could say, personality, right? And the way that he sort of, goes about things and goes around his agenda. So that in and of itself, I would say, is reason to suspect that President Donald Trump probably won't be backing down or conceding anytime soon. But he's also stated publicly, he's stated on his Twitter that he has no intentions of backing down, that he's going to exhaust every last resource that he possibly can in trying to find out the supposed truth behind this election. And he's really trying to invigorate his supporters and his voting base, who desperately want to see him in there for another 4 years. So I think it's really looking like the Trump administration will make this as difficult of a transition as possible for the Biden administration. They're gonna keep going after these lawsuits for as long as possible, and they're certainly not going to be cooperative.
Yeah, it's going to be quite interesting to see all of these events unfold. Thank you, Jacob, for your call in and for your reporting. And we'll get back to you later in the show.
Thanks so much, Gordon.
Now, on the topic of the transition, I'd like to toss it over to Sequoia to cover the race results for the federal election.
Thank you, Gordon. Yes, we're going to be taking a look specifically at the swing states, which tell the story of how Joe Biden was able to surpass the 270 electoral vote threshold and become our president-elect of the United States. So we're going to start by looking at the state of Florida. And this is a state where Biden had held a narrow lead going into election night, but Trump was able to take it with 51.2% of the vote. Meanwhile, Biden only has 47.9%. Then moving on to Georgia, this one's very interesting since Trump was expected to win, and he did appear to be winning until the mail-in votes came in, which have provided a very narrow margin for Biden. This race has not yet been called, but it appears that a victory for Biden is probable. He is at 49.5% of the vote. Trump is at 49.2% of the vote. Then moving forward to Iowa, this is a swing state, but it is one of the more Republican-leaning swing states, and that is how election night panned out. We see Trump with 53.2% of the vote, and Biden has 45% of the vote. Then moving forward to Michigan. This, of course, is a state in which Trump was able to subvert expectations and win in 2016. Michigan with 16 electoral votes certainly goes a long way there, but this time around, Biden was able to win an overwhelming majority of mail-in votes, which turned the tides in his favor. Biden has 50.6% in Michigan. Trump has 47.9%. Then moving forward to Ohio, where the state of Ohio has generally voted in line with the winner of the presidential election. We see that streak broken. Trump has 53.4% of the vote. Biden has only 45.2%. Then in Pennsylvania, this was a very interesting case where Trump had a huge margin of victory on election night, but Biden was able to pull it back with those mail-in votes. He's now at 50% of the vote, and Trump is at 48.9%. Then moving into Texas, we saw a bunch of energy in the Democrat camp. They were hopeful that they could turn this Republican stronghold blue, but instead we saw Trump win with 52.1% of the vote. Biden, meanwhile, got 46.5%. And our final swing state we're looking at is Wisconsin. This one's very similar to Michigan in that Trump was able to win an upset victory there in 2016, but just like Michigan, again, that's not how it panned out this year. Biden was able to win with 49.6% of the vote. Meanwhile, Trump only had 48.9% of the vote. So all major networks have called these races for Biden, but we will be waiting until December 8th until the election results are actually certified, and of course until January 20th when President-elect Biden is formally sworn in. That's all I've got. Back to you, Gordon.
Thank you for those results, Sequoia. But now we have breaking news. The Philadelphia Supreme Court rules against President Trump's poll watch challenge. The PA Supreme Court has ruled that PA did not violate state laws by restricting the distance poll workers could stand to the processing of mail-in ballots. The court ruled 5-2 against President Trump's legal team. Trump's legal team has previously appealed in a lower state court. PA Supreme Court says President Trump's own legal team supplied evidence that showed Republican poll watchers were standing close enough to observe the counting. Now, this breaking news goes hand in hand with what we're talking about before, how the legal cases are getting thrown out. This ties into what we were basically just talking about, saying that the cases are getting thrown out because the evidence being supplied is not valid enough to prove Trump's claim. Now, back to the original topic at hand, we have Jack Dutt staying in the field talking about the Latinx vote in the presidential race.
Thank you. The main factor that delivered the Latinx vote to Trump in South Florida was messaging by the Republican Party. The Republican Party went to great lengths to connect the more moderates of the Democratic Party to the more left-leaning candidates in the Democratic Party by connecting them to people like Maduro and Castro, who were, of course, the dictators in the regimes of the countries of Venezuela and Cuba, respectively. Now, this gets at the core of the issue of the Democratic Party, which is that the Democratic Party covers a broad range of candidates on both the left and more moderates like Joe Biden. And so by connecting these candidates to Joe Biden and painting Joe Biden as a more radical candidate, Republicans were able to effectively deliver Cuban American voters in South Florida. Now, polling has also treated Latinx voters as a monolith for many years. And LA Times writer Esmeralda Bermudez said, quote, "Latinos are not a monolith and the Latino vote is a mirage," end quote. The reasons Bermudez lists include geography, religion, skin color, assimilation, and immigration, among others. Back to you.
Thank you, Jack, for your report. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot more to come tonight. Please stay tuned. You are watching Election Connection, live news and coverage from Western Connecticut State University. Coming up now, we're going to be talking about the CTA, the Connecticut Teachers Association, and what has happened with that with COVID-19. In early October, the Connecticut Teachers Association did a survey of nearly 2,000 teachers, and they cited huge flaws with what is happening in the schools with COVID-19. Air ventilation is a problem in the schools. In non-alliance districts, 66% of the classrooms are not properly ventilated, but in alliance districts, the number jumps up to 78%. Also, 48% of alliance district teachers and 38% of non-alliance teachers are not supplied with proper protective equipment. And now there are over 380,000 kids back in school, in-person learning and online learning, and this is a struggle and kind of a hazard with what's going on now with the COVID spike, but at the same time, COVID cases within schools have not been going up. Sequoia, what's your take on this, and why do you think that cases are not going up in the schools?
Well, it is, of course, sad to hear that these districts are not provided with the protective equipment that they need in order to function properly. But it is interesting that the cases have remained very low, even in the face of this difficult situation where they don't have the equipment that they need. As for reasons why this could be so low, I can only speculate that children with their strong immune systems might just be able to remain asymptomatic and slip under the radar, since I am honestly not confident that with insufficient personal protective equipment, all these schools would be able to keep their coronavirus cases so low. So my best guess is that there may be some cases left undetected, but I honestly couldn't tell you for sure, Gordon.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting with everything that's going on. Dustin, do you have any quick take on this?
Sequoia makes a great point that kids are typically less susceptible to getting it. They're one of the smaller age groups that have cases reported. A classroom, even according to the governor, is still a fairly safe place to be as long as masks and distances are being adhered to.
Yeah, definitely. In the field right now to discuss more about schools and budgeting, we have Jack Dutt in the field covering the CSU budget cuts.
Thank you, Gordon. President Ojakian, president of the CSCU school system, requested $69 million as a bailout. This is due to a number of reasons, including drops in enrollment and a failure of system unions to provide givebacks. Now, UConn, which is outside of the CSCU system, also requested $104 million from the state. This brings the total requests, additional requests rather, to $173 million for this year. When asked about using the CARES Act fund, state administration said that already 90% of the money from that had been used in various relief efforts. Now, Governor Ned Lamont recommended using some of the state's deficit to help with the issue by clearing out $1.8 billion of the $2 billion. Back to you.
Thank you for your report, Jack. Based on your research, do you see the potential of these budgets being fixed with the debt being paid off with help from the state?
Well, the way President Ojakian put it was saying that the only way to fix this issue is if we raid the system budget to what he calls dangerous levels, or to get a bailout from the state. President Ojakian said, "We are desperately in need of help in building a bridge to take us beyond this troubled year." So it's anybody's guess at this point.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you so much for your reporting. We'll be getting back to you later in the show.
Thank you.
So Sequoia, what's your take on the CSU budget cuts that we were just covering?
Yeah, so it makes sense to me that these schools in Connecticut are in a tight spot. Of course, we were all sidelined by this pandemic when it hit in early 2020. And with the pandemic has come a number of precautions and extra measures that the universities have taken to ensure the best safety standards that they can for their students. So it's no surprise to me that they're requesting a government bailout, since they've been just about required to make all these expenditures that they could not have easily foreseen. So I feel for them in that regard, but I'm not entirely sure if the Connecticut government is going to be able to have their backs here. I mean, between the CSCU and UConn, we're looking at approaching $200 million to save our schools. Certainly an important cause, but I'm not sure if Ned Lamont and the state government will be able to just hand out money like that. Now, there is Connecticut's rainy day fund, where they have money set aside for a rainy day, and this day does seem pretty rainy to me. So I would hope that in these conditions they would be willing to dip into that secret supply of money. But I have no way of knowing exactly what Ned Lamont will do in this situation.
Yeah, and another interesting thing to add on top of this is the AAUP union is against these budget cuts. So we have a union that's against these budget cuts at all, and the teachers union, I apologize, are against these budget cuts, which is kind of interesting because we have these schools that are in debt, the enrollment numbers are dropping because of COVID, and they need money, and they need the bailout, but then we have a teachers union that's against these cuts, and that's against helping these schools, essentially. Dustin, do you have anything to say about this or any commentary to add?
Well, I mean, to use a metaphor, if you're going to build a log cabin, you're going to need to cut down some trees, and there's a great pull of money that we need. And if we cut it, what can really suffer is the students. And we don't want the students to suffer because they've already been dealing with so much. So if that is the main priority of all of those involved, hopefully they can find a solution. But money in Connecticut and its budget has just been an issue for so long.
Yeah, and the teachers union is basically saying, too, on top of everything, we have this rainy day fund, it's pouring. We need to use this rainy day fund so we can help schools out and help them lower tuition. Or not tuition, but lower the budget. Sequoia, do you see the rainy day fund as being a probable solution to what's going on?
Well, Gordon, this rainy day fund is sort of an enigma to me. I know that it's there. I know that in theory it is accessible to the schools for a need like this. But of course, given any state budget cycle, there will be an enormous number of organizations, departments, etc., clamoring for as big a slice of that pie, as much money as they can possibly get their hands on. So in order for Connecticut to accumulate a rainy day fund like this, they must have said no to other requests. So the question as I see it is, will this request be important enough that it supersedes all those other requests that they declined? Is Connecticut willing in this case to invest in their schools and protect the future of a sound education for their students?
Yeah, we have more breaking news that have just broke. The Georgia audits have found an error in Walton County. The audit revealed a cache of 284 uncounted votes for both candidates, with a small net gain of 172 votes for Trump from the error. This is the third glitch in Georgia's count tonight. Also discovered in the Georgia audit was nearly 3,000 votes, each in Floyd and Fayette counties. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger's office cited human error and, quote, gross negligence in the missing votes issue from Floyd County. Each seemed to center on misplaced or non-uploaded memory disks. While these issues are a surprising development in Georgia, there is not any indication of widespread errors in Georgia or any other state so far. So now we have more interesting things that are now being unveiled with votes being counted. And on the topic of voting, we have Austin Davis in the field, who is willing to discuss about ranked choice voting.
Thanks, guys. This next election cycle, you could be hearing about a little thing called ranked choice, a pertinent new form of voting that could lead the bipartisan divides between voter interests to succumb. I had the pleasure of speaking with Deb Otis, the senior analyst of Fair Vote, an organization that advocates for ranked choice. Otis is responsible for analyzing trends and previous election data, as well as stimulating public interest through articles, interviews, and in-person rallies. Fair Vote, as a company, she describes, gives the tools to Americans that give them the support they need in order to rally for better voting practices. In good confidence, Deb describes to me how ranked choice can take into account a person's individual preferences, cast votes on either a singular or proportional basis, is less complicated than standard voting practices, and represents the true majority of voters' intentions when selecting a candidate. Although Otis admits ranked choice poses a challenge, especially to elderly voters who are not used to the new system, ranked choice is still gaining traction in many places this year, most notably of them being Maine and Alaska, which are moving to place ranked choice as their new standard for future major political elections. Back to you guys.
Thank you, Austin, for the report. Now, for a follow-up question, based on the research you've done and the conversations you've had with Otis, do you see ranked choice voting potentially being soon for national elections, like presidential elections, in future elections to come with everything that you've been studying?
I definitely think so. It's a good option for most of America. Will it be taken up quickly? I do not know. But as it stands currently with ranked choice, I think it better suits people when they're selecting candidates because it doesn't take into account who is the major winner. It takes into account the priorities people place on certain issues in America.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you for your reporting, and we'll be getting back to you again later in the show. So, Sequoia, I want to pose a question to you about ranked choice voting. Do you think that this could help split the partisan divide we see right now with the country, where it's people feel they have to go one way or the other when it comes to a candidate? Do you think that ranked choice voting is going to help kind of split that divide?
Yeah, absolutely. So where we're at right now, of course, is we have the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, each with roughly almost 50% support in the country. They essentially split political support half and half. And in our current voting system, where each citizen casts one vote for one candidate, if you want your vote to affect the outcome of the election, it seems to Americans that you have to vote for either the Republican or the Democratic candidate. And this effectively erases much discussion about the third-party candidates in the presidential elections. Just this year, we had a number of interesting third-party candidates that didn't get much attention. I'm talking about Joe Jorgensen, Vermin Supreme, Howie Hawkins. These are candidates that aren't really in the spotlight very much because a vote for them is seen as a vote thrown away. But with ranked choice voting, voters would be able to more accurately list their preferences, which would essentially weaken the Republican, weaken the Democratic parties, and their monopoly or duopoly over American politics.
Yeah, 100%. Dustin, real quick, just to wrap it up, do you have anything else to add on the topic of ranked choice voting?
I understand the hesitance against it. Some people say that the left and right wing divide in our country is just as natural as anything else in our daily lives. In the election of 1912, Teddy Roosevelt ran as a third-party candidate, and it effectively split the Republican vote in half, allowing the Democratic candidate to win. So most of the country didn't want the Democratic candidate, Woodrow Wilson, to be president, but he still managed to win because of the divide in choice.
Yeah, definitely. Now, switching up a little bit, we have a call-in from Jonathan Ball, who is a student here and is the vice president of the Black Social Workers Association. Are you with us, Jonathan?
Yes, I am.
How are you doing today?
I am doing great. And yourself?
I'm doing great. To open up our discussion, I'd like to ask you how you feel about the outcome of the election this month.
Well, before I just want to give a little introduction into myself. My name is Jonathan Ball. I'm 20 years old. I am the vice president of the Black Social Workers Association. I am the play-by-play caller for WXCI for the football team. And I'm an RA here at WestCon. So,
Okay.
Just give some background so they know the man behind the voice.
Okay.
But in terms of the election, the man who everyone voted for won. Me personally, I was not the biggest fan of either candidate. I feel like some of the policies, current and past, of both Biden and Trump kind of go against how I feel morally. But nonetheless, change this country will take a long time past just electing a president or two. But the man who received the most votes won, and I think that's what democracy is all about. The people choose who's supposed to go into office.
Yeah, definitely. That is what a democracy is, after all. Last year, our campus was firebombed by the white supremacist organization Patriot Front. Shortly after, you attended and spoke at a demonstration on campus to speak out against racism. What were some of the issues you raised during your discussion and speech?
Yes, that attack on our campus, it shook me. Because, I've been dealing with racial issues my entire life as a black person. But watching that happen, it was like, now it's right in front of me. It happened right outside the dorms that I was living in that year. So the things I just spoke about were how a lot of people try to brush racism under the rug. They try to say, that was a long time ago. It's not as bad as it used to be. People are making excuses. And I had to say, hey, this is not something that has gone away. This is something that has been going on since slavery started, and it's just taken on new forms. Dog whistles, which is where you use certain terms to single out or discriminate against a group, but because you're using a cover term, people will not be able to call you racist if not educated enough about it. Stigmas, discrimination as a whole, prejudice. People need to open their eyes to what people of all races, but specifically black people in America, have been going through. So I just kind of wanted to educate the crowd and use my voice as a tool to reach people.
Yeah, for sure. How has the situation on campus changed since this has happened? Has it improved? Has it not improved? And what do you think the WestCon needs to work on next for future improvement?
I feel like things have changed, but they haven't. So, of course, immediately there was a rally. There were posts about it. And then about a month later, it all kind of subsided like nothing had ever gone on. And that's one of the frustrating things about any issue that comes up in media or happens. It happens, outrage, speaking about it, promises, and then it goes under the rug for the next thing that goes on. And the people affected in that original situation become forgotten. So while I do feel like there are steps taken immediately, such as, like I said, the rally, people posting outpours of support, soon after it was as if nothing had happened. People stopped talking about it. So one of the changes I would love to see at WestCon was just a more inclusivity. Oh, I'm sorry, I butchered that word. Being more inclusive for people of all denominations at the school. I know that alumni who were part of BSU, the Black Student Union, or the BSWA, the Black Social Worker Association, felt discriminated against during their events. They were told they had to have extra security. They were told they couldn't travel to certain areas, versus where there are other clubs that were not centered around black issues were allowed to do so.
Yeah, that is, very interesting, and I had no idea that that was going on campus. To wrap up our conversation, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to add on?
I just want to say thank you for having me on here. The best thing that you could ever do for yourself and others in these situations, educate yourself. Open your minds and just reach out. Black power. That's all I have. Thank you for having me again.
Yes, thank you for calling in, and have a good rest of your night.
You as well.
Stay tuned, guys. We'll be right back with more.
The Exceptional Sidekick Service Dogs transformed lives by partnering psychiatric service dogs to disabled teens and young adults, empowering handlers to complete their education and open up their world to the life they want to live. Breaking through the stigma of mental illness, the Exceptional Sidekick task trains service dogs to mitigate specific symptoms of their handlers' psychiatric disabilities, helping to put their independence within reach by improving attendance, leading to a higher education, gaining of stability, and employment. The Exceptional Sidekick actively collaborates within our community to work cooperatively to raise and train these exceptional sidekicks and to create a long-term network of support for their handlers.
Just as a reminder to all our viewers out there, you are watching Election Connection, Western Connecticut State University's live news and election coverage for 2020. Moving on to our next subject of the night, we are going to be talking about politics and law. And we're going to open the discussion with the new Supreme Court nominee and the Supreme Court cases that are now being proposed to the Supreme Court. Sequoia, what's your take on the new nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court?
Well, of course, it almost seems like old news at this point that the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett has left a bad taste in the mouths of many following the nomination of Merrick Garland back in 2016. Of course, Senate Republicans made the case back then that they were going to set a new precedent such that presidents were not to nominate a new Supreme Court justice during an election year, and rather the election should decide whether a Republican or Democratic president would get to nominate a Supreme Court justice. But then in 2020, of course, only a month or so before the election, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, President Trump nominated Amy Coney Barrett, and Republicans did confirm her to the Supreme Court. So the inconsistency there is pretty upsetting to many Democrats and Americans as a whole who value consistency and integrity. But as this will affect upcoming Supreme Court cases, what I'm interested in is whether these Trump-appointed justices, Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, Neil Gorsuch, are going to exclusively side with the Republican conservative side of every issue, or if they're going to take on their job in a stricter, more traditional sense of the term and seek only to interpret the law as accurately as they can.
Yep. And on the phone right now calling in, we have our field reporter, Austin Davis, to talk about the Supreme Court cases that they are currently dealing with. Austin, you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
There are two major cases in the front of the Supreme Court right now. The Supreme Court recently heard arguments for Fulton versus the City of Philadelphia, which also happens to be one of the first cases to be placed in front of the newly appointed Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Reports say the court prepared to rule in favor of the Roman Catholic Adoption Agency, arguing that it is entitled to discriminate against foster parents on the basis of sexual orientation. However, the city also found that Catholic Social Services was refusing to certify same-sex couples. This event led officials to stop referring children to their location. Reason being, there's a law that is already in place prohibiting discrimination, and as such, the city quickly updated their contract to make that rule explicitly clear. CSS claims that exclusion of it from the state foster care system violates First Amendment protections against religious discrimination. In other news, 2 lower courts have also sided with the city because of the prior Supreme Court case, Employment Division versus Smith from 1990. In that case, an opinion written by Justice Antonin Scalia ruled that the court has never said a person's religion excuses them from following valid laws. Neil Katyal, an attorney representing Philadelphia in the case, told the justices that the framing should not be religion versus same-sex equality. Instead, Philadelphia sees it as a move by religious groups on the government's right to regulate government services. This goes beyond foster care, according to Katyal. A ruling in favor of CSS may allow contractors to openly refuse services to religious groups from Buddhists to Baptists based on their own religious preferences. Conservative Justice Alito and Kavanaugh have accused Philadelphia as overreaching, and their discussion during the argument has analysts predicting a ruling in CSS's favor. City Solicitor Marcel Pratt told NBC that Philadelphia proudly respects and protects all of its residents' religious freedoms. But those freedoms do not allow contractors performing a city service to choose which residents they will serve based solely on their sexual preferences.
Thank you for that report, Austin. And now to ask a follow-up question. Do you have any insight based on your reporting on how these court cases could potentially turn out?
I believe it is in Philadelphia's best interest to side with letting same-sex couples allow foster children into their family, because that is the only option they have in our world today. It is an unlikely option for them, but, it's nonetheless, it works to their advantage. I think it's denying them a right that they have been born solely in America by saying they can't have kids, because obviously same-sex couples are a little bit biased in that way, especially considering heterosexual couples take precedence in our nation. But the ruling is still out, and we will have to see.
Yes, we will. Thank you for your reporting, Austin, and we'll be talking to you more later in the show. Sequoia, what are your thoughts on the Supreme Court cases, and how do you see things panning out?
Yeah, well, it's easy to look at the case of foster children and same-sex married couples as a strictly partisan one, where conservatives would not side with same-sex married couples, but liberals would. I like to apply a little more nuance to the situation, because as there is some scientific basis to make the claim that children grow up better when they have a same-sex role model in their household. So, for example, a young boy growing up with 2 moms might not have a strong male role model in his life, and some studies would suggest that that puts him at a disadvantage for development. But is that enough to discriminate against same-sex married couples? I say absolutely not. I say that there are plenty of other ways that there can be a strong male or female or whatever role model in a child's life. So my opinion is that the court should absolutely side with the rights of same-sex married couples here.
Yeah, there definitely should not be a discriminatory issue when it comes to who people should or should not adopt to. But at the same time, this is one of those very tough situations where it's religious belief versus a state ruling. Now, Dustin, I'd like to pose a question to you. Do you see this, depending on how this pans out, do you see this as a potential like separation of church and state or religious freedom? Can this affect it in any way?
It definitely is going to be an indicator to how the court may act from years to come. It's same-sex rights, it is religious freedom, it is quite apt that this is one of the first cases that this new 6-3 conservative-leaning court is judging on. This is going to be the indicator on how similar cases will be decided in the future.
Yes, this is definitely going to pave the groundwork for Amy Coney Barrett and how she is going to be resolving cases in the near future. Sequoia, to pose another question to you, do you see this and how she may vote as kind of not blindly, but aligned with the law? Or can you potentially see religious bias come into play when it comes to deciding this case?
You know, Gordon, I don't say this lightly, but I do believe that there is some reason for concern in Amy Coney Barrett and the possibility of her voting strictly in alignment with her religion. There are a number of concerning stories regarding transcripts of her speaking in years past about the purpose of a judge, and she has spoken about the role of religion in that in such a way that I'm a bit concerned that she may vote in favor of what her religion would support rather than how she thinks the law is best interpreted.
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts to add to this, Dustin?
I'm just very curious to how this case will come out, just for the reason I said before, because I think it will be very indicative to how the next few decades are going to be in this country.
Yeah, it is going to be definitely interesting to see. Now, in the field with us, moving topics a little bit, we have Jeff Hess talking about Justin Clark's profile. Jeff?
Hi, guys. Tonight we're taking a closer look at Justin Clark. Justin Clark is a Trump deputy campaign manager and a campaign lawyer working on legal battles being waged in more than a dozen states. He grew up as a moderate Democrat from Connecticut, graduated from law school at UConn Law, and became a clerk for Peter Zarella, a former justice on the Connecticut Supreme Court. When asked to describe Clark, Zarella said, he looks at situations from all angles and approaches everything with intensity, hard work, and thoroughness. In 2019, Clark was added to a list of 19 most influential people leading up to the 2020 elections by Political Playbook Power. Clark is kept busy throughout his influential career. He worked as a trial lawyer and served as West Hartford Republicans Party chairman. He made an unsuccessful run for the town council in 2009, and in both 2010 and 2014, Clark ran Republican Tom Foley's gubernatorial campaign. Once he reached the White House, Clark worked as a White House staffer for several years. He also worked as a liaison to Congress in 2018. Clark helped build support for Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation to the U.S. Supreme Court, and Clark met largely with Trump and managed to become very close to the president, earning himself a spot as the deputy campaign manager. Clark was once a minor figure. However, recently he was caught on tape giving a speech to a group of Wisconsin lawyers where he praised the state's voter ID laws, the same laws that Democrats feel suppresses the vote, especially for people of color. He's also talked about the differences that Republicans and Democrats approach the 2020 election, saying, let's start playing offense a little bit. Clark took legal action to stop the vote count in Pennsylvania until, quote, there's a meaningful transparency and Republicans can ensure all counting is done above board and by the law. On Friday, a federal judge threw out that lawsuit, along with similar ones filed by Trump's team in Georgia and Michigan. Back to you guys.
Thank you for your report. Do you have anything to add, Sequoia? Do you have anything to add to this and how you think that he will be able to play out with the court cases?
Yeah, I'm really unsure how far Justin Clark's loyalty to Trump will go here. Of course, loyalty is something that's proven to be very important to Donald Trump in his associates. But since Justin Clark has this history of being a Democrat before he switched over to the Republican side, I imagine that he might be one of the earlier ones to notice the holes in Trump's legal strategies here. And he may just bid the Trump campaign farewell, as many, if not all of their lawsuits in swing states so far have been largely baseless.
Yeah, it's been quite interesting to see how these cases have been turning out. Now we're going to be switching gears over to COVID restrictions, and COVID in Connecticut throughout the university and throughout the state as a whole. We're going to be going to our field reporter now, Siobhan, who is going to be covering the effect of the new restrictions on restaurants, who is going to be conducting an interview.
Hi, I'm Siobhan Brown. I'm with WCSU News and Election Coverage. I'm here with Johnny Galito, the owner of Marzano's Restaurant in Torrington. And he's going to give us some insight on how COVID has affected his business and maybe other businesses that he might know of. Hi, Johnny. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you today?
Good, good. How has COVID, in detail, if you can, has it affected your restaurant sales?
That's a difficult question to answer fast, but basically in the beginning of the COVID, we were very worried about people coming in, coming out of the house, coming around us and being safe. But after we got a hold on everything, it picked up takeout immensely. So we got a whole new takeout crowd out of it, which helped us out. Because we just moved into this location a month before the COVID hit. So we had our brand new location here up on top of East Main Street and our standalone store. And with the new restaurant, we had the big patio outside, so that helped a lot. Without the patio, I don't think it would have been possible. So I was, I guess, one of the fortunate ones to be able to be, in a new location with a big patio and the space to do takeout and the ability in the kitchen to do it. So it actually, it hasn't hurt us at all, but it hasn't helped us at all in the way. So we kind of steady with a steady increase of sales throughout the whole 10-month period. So we're doing all right.
Good.
Other people I know are not doing as well, but Torrington seems to be doing pretty good, pretty strong. So we're holding in. We're doing good.
And what changes have you made to the, restaurant in terms of complying with the state regulations and the needs of your customers? And...
Yeah, those regulations tend to change, frequently. So we kind of have to stay up to date and keep an eye out and ear out for a lot of other restaurants in town and businesses and what they were doing. So a lot of us in town talk, me and other business owners, and try to get, what works, what doesn't work, what customers have said, their restaurants and mine. And then we kind of got together and made a few small changes, but we just try to keep everything sanitized. Every Sunday we close down, we sanitize up and down. We have hand sanitizer everywhere, up and down the doors and the registers. Staff washes their hands regularly, all the basic things. And then, we just keep the 6-foot tables, 50% occupancy, and little things like that. But it hasn't really affected us. We've kind of got used to it, I guess, in a way. So we've been doing good. It's been adjusting. It's an adjustment period.
Are you worried now that we're entering in the colder season?
I tend to be optimistic, I guess people say. I don't worry per se, but if it happens, it happens, and you got to adjust again. That's all. But I think this time around we might be a little in a better spot than when it first came around. I think people kind of tend to get more comfortable with it and understand the virus a little more, and not as afraid. So we shall see.
Good.
Hopefully it'll be okay.
Good. Yes, and I hope all the best to you and Marzano's too in the near future.
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm Siobhan Brown with WCSU News. Back to the studio.
Thank you, Siobhan, for your great interview. And that gave us a lot more insight on everything regarding the restrictions and restaurants and how this restaurant in particular is handling it. But those same guidelines and restrictions are most likely being applied to all restaurants within the state. Sequoia, when it comes to the COVID lockdowns, we see that the numbers of COVID are going up in the state. Do you think that depending on how this plays out, the lockdowns are going to be enacted for a while? Or do you think that if the numbers plummet by the end of the year and start to decrease, that there's going to be wider restrictions and the restrictions are going to open up a little more?
Well, as far as I can tell, we're in it for a while, at least over the next few months. We have been told since around the time this pandemic started by public health officials that the rise and fall of the virus correlates very much with the weather conditions. And we did see, as spring turned to summer, a drastic decrease in cases, at least here in Connecticut. And then as the fall started up again, cases went up and up and up, and now we are at an all-time high. So Going off of that, it seems probable to me that we are in for a very high number of cases through the fall and through the incoming winter. And this will, I would imagine, result in tighter regulations, stricter lockdowns on businesses and private citizens as our state government does what it can to limit the spread of the virus. But we have heard from Dr. Anthony Fauci that it is very likely that these vaccines that we are starting to hear about will likely become available to all Americans by April. So by maybe late summer, if I could make a guess as to how long it will take for a majority of Americans to take the vaccine, we will likely be in a very different place from where we are now. But for the months to come, if the theory with warm weather and cold weather holds true, then we are in for a very rough winter.
Yes, we are. And to change topics real quick, we have some really big breaking news right now. Trump fires Department of Homeland Security and Cybersecurity, the director. And President Trump fires Chris Krebs, the DHS cybersecurity director, in a tweet. Trump took this action seemingly in retaliation for Krebs supporting the integrity of the election results. Trump directly cited Chris Krebs commenting about the election of the firing. Krebs said in joint statement from state and private election officials that there, quote, is no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised. Trump tweeted after reading the statement, quote, the recent statement by Chris Krebs on the security of the 2020 election was highly inaccurate in that there was massive improprieties and fraud. Therefore, effective immediately, Chris Krebs has been terminated as a director of cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency. Now, this is an interesting piece of breaking news, and I think this is probably the first time in history where a sitting president has fired somebody over a tweet. And I would just like to take a quick moment to see your guys' thoughts on this. Dustin, what is your thoughts on this? This is very big news.
I truly believe that this is quite incredibly dangerous. Hell hath no fury than a president scorn. And we have to remember that Donald Trump is still the president, and he still has all of this power, and he still feels like he can pretty much do whatever he wants. He says what he wants and hopes for it to be true. And now we see an example of someone not towing that line and suffering the consequences for it. So if he is firing people who disagree with him on his baseless and evidenceless accusations, what could happen from here?
Yeah, and it is also the president's right to fire and hire whoever he wants at the same time. He is still the sitting president, as you said, and while he finishes his term, he does have the right to do this. He could hire someone new tonight if he wanted to. He can fire his whole cabinet if he wanted to. That's in his right. But I want to pass a question to Sequoia that you just helped me construct in my head a little there, Dustin. Sequoia, with what we talked about before, how one of Trump's cases got thrown out, and he's now firing somebody over saying that there was no proof of fraud of the election. What do you have to say about this?
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting point that you're raising, Gordon. We have seen that, for the most part, Trump's legal cases regarding the election have gone absolutely nowhere. The courts have almost universally seen that there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud. And here we have Krebs saying exactly that the election was very secure. And overall, the country agrees on that. It's only Trump supporters who are sounding the alarm of widespread election fraud. So we are seeing Trump firing one of his officials for saying something that Trump doesn't like. And that is not normal. That is alarming. And I want to make it clear that that is not something that we should take without pondering the seriousness of this type of governing, where President Trump is willing to silence any voices in his government who don't agree with what he thinks. Chris Krebs is an authority on this matter and likely has a deeper understanding of the issue than President Trump. So for President Trump to fire him in what appears to be an act of silencing because Trump claims to know more than Krebs, it seems really shallow. It seems like Trump really just wants to exert complete control over the government, and that's not how the United States works.
Well, at the same time, there are still court cases going on, and there are still court cases pending. There's many of them pending that he's filed. So we still don't know 100% what could happen in these court cases. Something, you never know. He can pull a cat out of a bag entirely and potentially find something that could be interesting and gain him a lot of votes. And also with the same token, with all this going on, because he is the sitting president, he does have the right to fire and hire whoever he wants. He has the right to say what he wants and basically just control his cabinet. If he feels that someone needs to be fired or someone needs to replace him, he has the right to do it. But at the same token, it is very interesting that it's happening in this manner because it's over social media, which is surprising in itself that it wasn't a formal letter. He did it in a tweet to basically every American in the United States. And it's interesting because it's of a very tense manner that's causing a lot of divide politically right now. And it's just very interesting how this is playing out. But I want to switch back and roll back to what we were talking about previously with COVID restrictions in Connecticut. So with what's going on right now with the restrictions, how we've rolled back to 2.1, and the vaccine, as has been aired, is now said to be finished in December, according to Fauci. Do you see, Dustin, do you think that this vaccine, now that it is announced that it's going to be finished by December, could have an effect on the lockdowns in Connecticut? And do you think that it could potentially allow for business owners to, quote, flap their wings a little more and open up more?
I think a similar discussion that was had around the first lockdowns are going to have to be had again. Do we risk jumping the gun too early? So in parts of the country after the first wave, they felt like they weren't either affected or that their numbers went down. They roll back restrictions, another wave of infections come. So even though we have this great news of a vaccine, which could probably take a while to roll out, the question is, do we risk jumping the gun? Do we risk making a decision too quick and without caution causing more infections?
Yeah, definitely. Sequoia, do you have any input to add on this, on the vaccine and its potential to allow for the restrictions to loosen a little?
Yeah, we have heard from Dr. Fauci that the vaccine candidates that we've been hearing about in the news lately will likely become available to all Americans by April. But of course, there are a lot of hurdles to cross. We need to manufacture millions and millions of vaccines. We need to distribute these vaccines everywhere. We need to solve the problem of deciding who gets the vaccines. How much are they going to cost? Are they going to be free? There is a lot to be figured out. And I'm hopeful that we will be able to distribute a good vaccine to Americans, which I think will, depending upon the effectiveness of the vaccine itself and the willingness of the American people to take the vaccine, result in businesses being able to operate more. With an effective vaccine in place, maybe something like a trip to an amusement park or a concert will not be such a far-fetched idea.
Yeah. Well, don't go anywhere, folks. Coming up next, OnlyFans and going online during COVID times. This is Election Connection, Western Connecticut State University's live news and election coverage for 2020. I'm Gordon Mochio. Tonight, we're looking at this year's election and what it means for Connecticut and the nation. And
I'm Sequoia Lowe. We are streaming live over YouTube, WCSU Election Connection, wcsu.edu/live, and WXCI 91.7 FM Danbury. You can also tweet us at ElectionCT.
And I am Dustin Martin. Thank you for joining us again. And now for some news in technology, culture, and some current events.
Yes, and we're going to open up this section of discussion with a new social media app that is taking the adult film industry to mobile devices, and that is called OnlyFans.
With unemployment rising, many creators are turning to the platform OnlyFans to make money. This content can range from business advice to adult entertainment. Comedian Jamie Lee Simmons started on OnlyFans in March of 2020. Ms. Simmons has gained popularity on TikTok as a comedian and by giving advice on self-marketing. Her OnlyFans content blends her comedy and her semi-nude content. Before making content on OnlyFans, Simmons worked a corporate job in sales while also pursuing a career in comedy. However, the COVID pandemic and the slowing of business pushed Simmons to pursue a different strategy to make money.
Like all of our shows and income went away. So I didn't have income and I was in sales selling marketing. And that was really hard. So I needed money. So I think that's why it's been so successful and it really has grown.
A popular trend on the video platform TikTok has been creators sharing what they've earned from OnlyFans.
So I made my first video and I was like, what's going to kind of capture people's attention? It's, the percentage I'm in, how much I've made, and I just put it out there. And within like a week, it had over 1 million views, and I was like, oh my goodness. Since then, I've made over 90,000 gross and over 72,000 net since March 15th.
Simmons also argues that the platform has positive outsides of making money.
And I think that OnlyFans has completely changed people's perspective and mind of sex work. And I love that side. I love it for people.
While Simmons appreciates the changing attitude towards sex work, she recognizes that there's still a stigma around it.
I've lost my best friends over it. They've call me trashy. I've had family members upset. People could lose their job over having an OnlyFans, even if they're not doing anything in the adult industry.
Despite this, Simmons still sees potential in the future of the platform.
OnlyFans isn't just used for sex work. It could be used for fitness. It could be used for if you're doing tarot readings. And I think that's why it's going to be more acceptable, is because people's perception and the connotation that OnlyFans has is going to be so different come 2021.
We also spoke to Arabelle, an adult content creator on the platform, for her perspective. When asking about how COVID-19 has affected her growth, she said, I didn't really see much growth change with COVID. I was more scared of losing subs with the unemployment rate skyrocketing. Luckily, it was just a steady increase until my subscriber count doubled over the past month. On how she views her success and future on the platform, she said, I saw it as a temporary thing, just maybe make a few $100s a month. Then I blew up way more than I thought I would. I've really been looking at this as a future career. Arabelle also expressed concern about sex workers and the adult entertainers being able to exist on OnlyFans, saying people have been worried that OnlyFans may continue to limit things on the site and make it worse for sex work type creators. This is Vivian Jimenez Rijo, WCSU News, Election Connection.
And this is an interesting segue into going online and transferring online during COVID, because we see people like these workers using this platform, OnlyFans, to create income while they are currently unemployed and out of work. Sequoia, they mentioned in the video that the platform OnlyFans isn't just for sex work, but more so can be used for anything from fitness work to, as she said, tarot reading or cooking or anything else. Do you see this app being used for that as well, and for people making money online using it?
You know what? The short answer is I don't, Gordon. But I will say that I think that it is a very interesting business model where creators outside of the adult film industry can have some fans opt into a system where they're able to see exclusive content. This reminds me of what we see with Patreon, a similar recurring payment platform where fans pay a monthly fee to see behind-the-scenes videos and other goodies like that. But with OnlyFans, this is a service with a reputation for serving adult content, and as a result, I think that online creators who are interested in this recurring subscription model, but are not in the adult film industry, are not going to mess with OnlyFans, and instead are going to opt for something like Patreon instead.
Yep, I agree with that statement. Dustin, do you have anything to add pertaining to the subject?
There's a lot in COVID that is going to change society in ways that are going to be very permanent. in ways that people wouldn't have otherwise predicted. And one of these ways is the ability for people to be able to self-publish their content. It's been popular for the past decade now, but now that so many are being forced into the model of producing their own content, which goes directly to the consumer, they're cutting out more of the middleman. This is going to be a big shift in not only adult industry, but in the content making industry as a whole.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a paradigm shift. Moving on to our next topic, we have Brian Emro in the field right now, who's going to be discussing the recent COVID outbreak at Quinnipiac University.
Thanks, Gordon. As of Friday, November 6th, Quinnipiac University has gone into the red state and enforced a 14-day quarantine. This results in the fact that since November 4th, when the quarantine should have taken effect, they were originally in the orange state and it moved into the red state. This is because since then, there have been 115 reported new COVID cases. There have been proper precautions taken place, though, and in a report from the senior medical advisor, David Hill, they cite the precautions, which is that all students have been tested, all residential students have been tested on Monday, November 9th, and off-campus students have been tested on Tuesday, November 10th. All resident students are supposed to remain in their dorms from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. every day, and they're only allowed to leave their dorms to pick up their grab-and-go meals. Except if you are in isolation, your meals are delivered from 5:45 p.m. to 7 p.m. every single night. Now, on-campus students are not allowed to make any trips off-campus, and off-campus students aren't allowed to make any trips on campus unless it's to get their COVID test. Now, the problem is that the campus is still in the red status, and that means that the university should close if it doesn't clear up by tomorrow. As of November 9th, there were a total of 272 active cases in isolation with a positive test rate of 7.2%. As of yesterday, that has dropped to 268 active cases with a positive test rate of only 3.4%. However, with the last day of quarantine being tomorrow, the decision looms of whether or not the campus will remain open for the semester or if they will go virtually online. Back to you, Dustin, or Gordon.
Thank you, Brian. Just as a wrapping up question, with the research you've done on the subject, do you see them opening up after the quarantine ends? We've seen a small dip in the numbers, but it doesn't look like a substantial amount to stay open. But with the research you've done, do you think that the school is going to call it all virtual and send everyone back, or just stop everything?
I believe so. The campus is still in the red status, and with the last day of quarantine being tomorrow, it's going to be hard to move that status to orange or even green. So the decision should be to close the campus for the rest of the semester.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your reporting, and we'll be getting back to you later.
Thank you.
Dustin, about the Quinnipiac outbreak, do you have any comments you would like to discuss about it?
Certainly, this is just a pattern that we're going to be seeing throughout not only the entire state, but the entire country. Our own University of WestCon has seen a positivity rate of 4% that it's jumped up to in the past month. So I'm not surprised by what's going on at Quinnipiac. I know UConn, as a campus, has decided to quarantine its students in the 2 weeks before sending them all back home to Thanksgiving. This is a problem we're going to see across all these campuses, as predicted by many before the school year even began.
Yeah. Sequoia, do you have any final statements to add to this?
Sure, yeah. You know, we have been somewhat lucky at WestCon so far this semester to have been able to remain with in-person classes, but we are seeing at a number of other universities in the state and across the country and world that has not been a viable option for them given the outbreak of cases. And we all know by now that universities are just a really difficult situation when it comes to limiting the spread of coronavirus, since there are so many people packed in relatively tight quarters. It's almost perfect conditions for spreading the virus. And we've seen these universities struggle to strike a balance, if at all possible, between regulations to keep the students safe and providing a quality in-person education experience. And without detailed information on what these other universities like Quinnipiac have been doing, I don't feel comfortable saying that WestCon has been doing or making the right calls and Quinnipiac has been making the wrong calls. To some extent, the spread of this virus really has a mind of its own. And while it's sad to see other universities struggle so much, I can say that I've been enjoying my somewhat in-person semester so far, and I'm hopeful that as the situation develops, we'll see conditions improve and more in-person classes going forward.
Right. Well, switching gears a little bit, we have Michaela in the field doing man-on-the-street interviews talking about the election.
Thank you, Gordon. So I'm here with Sam. He's a student here at WCSU. We're going to begin with a couple questions about the election. So Sam, did you vote in this election?
Yes, I have.
Is this the first time that you voted in a presidential election?
It is, in fact, yeah.
And are you pleased with the outcome of this election?
I'm all right with it. Obviously, this was a difficult election. This was like two opposing sides. It felt like the nation was divided, really. And I feel like for my vote, it turned out the way I wanted it to. We'll see how that turns out, though.
What kind of expectations did you have about the outcome of this election?
Not many. Honestly, I expected it to be a lot closer than it was. I expected it to come down to the wire. I'm very surprised that it came out the way it did, but I am happy about that.
What were some of your main concerns going into this election?
Some of the main concerns that I had were, I guess exactly what's happening now, where I guess the president didn't really want to accept the fact that, or the projection of what's going on, and sort of make the process a little bit harder than it is. So my expectations are kind of met right now with the resistance that's going on in the White House, but we'll see how that proceeds.
And what were some of your biggest concerns going into this election in terms of policy?
Okay, in terms of policy, economic policy was one of the big things, because over the last 4 years, we have, aside from the coronavirus, we have steadily grown a little bit in economic prosperity. So I was a little bit worried that things might shift depending on what policies might get enacted or might get recalled. So I'm sort of interested to see what's going on with the economy within the next couple of years.
Now, given that Joe Biden is the president-elect, what do you have in terms of expectations for his administration in the upcoming years?
I expect him to, I guess, just bring us all together, because it seems like for the past 4 years we've been really divided. I don't really expect a whole bunch from presidents, really, because when you look at it, presidents don't really affect day-to-day life for every normal person. It's really local policies that I try to focus on and worry about. So I just expect them to hold down the fort, bring us all together, and make America the country what it used to be, I guess. Yeah.
Now, if we could switch gears just slightly to COVID, are you aware of the numbers in Connecticut currently trending up, and what worries you about those?
I'm not too worried, because it seems like our governor is doing a pretty decent job, and especially on campus, the campus seems to be doing a decent job of preventing the spread and doing as much as they can. I'm only concerned that people might come from other states coming to work and everything from New York. They might carry it over the border a little bit. So the cases might spike just a little bit, but I'm not too concerned about that. It didn't seem to be too much of a problem the first wave, so I'm not too concerned about it.
And now, when it comes to policies on campus, do you see students generally following the COVID guidelines, or do you see a lot of students breaking the rules?
Yeah, everyone, especially on WestCon campus, I know, over my time here, everyone's really friendly, and everyone really tries to help each other out. So, there was no one really going against the guidelines. Everyone was following them pretty well, and they're trying to help each other out, because we try to help each other out on this campus, and it's pretty good.
Now, how do you feel about this last upcoming week? Are you hopeful about the next week, worried about the next week? What are your opinions going into Thanksgiving?
I just take it day by day. I'm not too worried about it. If anything goes to show, you don't really just jump at any shocking news, really, because there's always more to it, and there's always going to be a tomorrow. So I'm not too worried about anything. I'm hopeful.
All right, awesome. That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Sam, and back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you, Michaela, for that very entertaining interview. It was very fun to watch. Now, when it comes to the topics that they were talking about, I'd like to pose a similar question to you guys here in the studio with me, starting with Dustin. Now, we're going virtual after Thanksgiving break. This is our last week of in-person classes. And when it comes to the COVID policies on WestCon, have you seen students breaking them, or have students been pretty following of them?
I would say for the most part, you walk around campus and you see a lot of people wearing masks. In classrooms, especially in classrooms, you see students participating in distancing. Now, do you see some students gathering for lunch or for dinner and they're sitting close together without their masks? You see that a bit. Do you see some mask procedure not being strictly adhered to? Either is it underneath someone's nose? Are they touching it a lot? But that's going to be found anywhere, not exclusively at WestCon. I'm actually very impressed with the students' ability to maintain a lot of the protocols.
Yeah, and on the topic of eating without masks on and eating close together, we have Peter Falcone standing in the field right now willing to talk about Thanksgiving with COVID.
Good evening, Gordon. So Thanksgiving is right around the corner, and here at Western Connecticut State University, next Tuesday, November 24th, is our last day of in-person classes. After that date, WestCon and the other Connecticut State University colleges will move to an online format similar to what was done when the pandemic first began. This comes after recommendations from Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont, who on Friday, November 6th, rolled back Connecticut into a phase known as 2.1. Now, family gatherings and travel, which are both huge aspects of Thanksgiving, are impacted. Let's take a look at family gatherings, private gatherings, if you will. If you're having a private gathering at a private residence, you can only have 10 people, regardless of whether it's indoor or outdoor. Meanwhile, if you hold a private gathering at a commercial facility, you can have up to 25 people indoors and 50 people outdoors. Moving to travel, the latest travel advisory, if you are coming into Connecticut from another state, a mandatory 14-day quarantine is required before you can travel again. Right now, the only states that are not on the quarantine list include New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Hawaii. Now, if you cannot get together with your family members in person, we recommend video chat services like Zoom, which can provide video chats so that everyone can see their family members while maintaining social distancing and from the comfort of their own home. Now, regardless, this Thanksgiving will be unlike any other. Back to you, Gordon, Sequoia, and Dustin.
Thank you, Peter, for your report. And I'd like to ask you a quick question on the matter. Do you see with the research that you've done, these guidelines that you mentioned affecting families meeting for Thanksgiving?
Well, it really does. And especially if the family members are scattered from other states. So like if you have family who lives in New York and you live in Connecticut or any other state, it could be hard to be together because you got to travel, and then who knows if you could be carrying an illness over to your family members. Like, as you know, Connecticut pretty big for COVID, and you almost don't want to risk carrying it over to other people who live in other states. So yeah, that's the important element of this.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you, Peter, and we'll be talking to you more later.
Thank you very much.
So, Dustin, do you feel that these restrictions on meeting your family are a little harsh, or do you think that they're more so right and just with everything going on with Connecticut right now?
With the cases skyrocketing as they are, in the past month alone, going from just 2,000, not just, but from 2,000 a day to almost over 4,000 a day. Thanksgiving not only has, but probably will be an amazing super spreading event throughout the entire nation. A lot of these restrictions tell the story of where the state thinks that most of these cases are coming from. And a lot of people aren't getting them necessarily in the classroom or at the grocery store, but they're getting them with their friends and their families and their loved ones. So it makes sense that the hardest hit of all these restrictions is the private residence restriction, limiting people to just 10 guests. It's one of the biggest spreaders, so I think that these restrictions are apt for the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday.
Yeah, Sequoia, do you think that people are very apt to rebel with the restrictions in place? Because I feel like it's like what we were talking about earlier, it's more of a partisan issue where some people are going to say, I want more than 10 and not follow them, and others are going to follow them. How do you think this is going to play out for the average family?
Yes, I do think there will be a lot of families that choose to disregard these guidelines in Connecticut and across the country. We have seen a lot of citizens who claim that COVID-19 is not real or that it's not very bad, and this has led to a lot of problems. But I also want to speak about how I feel a great deal of compassion for families who find themselves in this situation. It is a deeply rooted human need to connect with those you care about and see your family. And this year we find ourselves in conditions where we can't do that, and that's very difficult. So the safest choice we can make is to distance ourselves for now and connect with our family in other ways. But even though I may disagree with the decision, I understand why people are willing to go to any lengths to see and care for those that they love.
Right. Well, switching topics a little bit, we have our field reporter Emily Ravillo in the field who is going to be covering election misinformation.
Thanks, guys. So I'm going to be starting off by talking about One American News Network, or OANN. They've branded themselves as a sort of pro-Trump, very pro-right-wing news network. And they are, unfortunately, one of the biggest sources of misinformation surrounding this election. So they released a video the Wednesday immediately following the election that was entitled, quote, Trump won, MSM hopes you don't believe your eyes, unquote. So the video made several baseless claims, including that not only that Trump had won, which at that point the votes had not been fully counted yet, so there was not a clear winner, but also that counting mail-in ballots was a sort of way to throw the election one way that was not necessarily truthful. So the video was uploaded to YouTube, and YouTube actually did not remove the video despite the fact that it contained misinformation. They released two statements about this regarding their policies. So they basically said that inaccurately declaring that a candidate had won an election was not necessarily falling into their policies for what was or was not election misinformation. It was not grounds for the video to be removed. However, it was grounds for demonetization, so the video is no longer monetized on YouTube's website. Additionally, President Donald Trump has threatened to take the issue of the election to the Supreme Court, which we've talked about before in the show, how he's had some more like minor courts or lower courts, I should say, in swing states. He's taken some battles to them, but he can't necessarily directly go to the Supreme Court. So that's another example of misinformation regarding this. And his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, actually issued a statement that goes along with this at the Four Seasons Total Landscaping in Pennsylvania, where he basically said, networks don't conclude elections, courts do. And this is misleading for several reasons. Mainly because it implies that courts decide elections in the first place, and they don't. Courts really only step into elections when it is absolutely necessary to determine where the race falls in a specific location. It also implies that networks normally have a say in how an election goes, or that the networks are attempting to sway the election, while networks normally their entire job is just to simply report the numbers as they come in. So this is just an example of misinformation being spread. The election is not really up for debate in courts as much as they've been trying to imply. The results of this election can be determined basically just by looking at the numbers. Back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you, Emily, for your reporting, and we're going to be getting back more to you later. In the meantime, we have some breaking news. Deadlocked board in key Michigan county has failed to certify vote by their state deadline. The Wayne County Board of Canvassers is split on whether they should certify the Wayne County ballot count. This leaves the decision to the State Regulatory Board, which meets November 23rd, as per the Washington Post. Republican lawyers have been questioning the legitimacy of the vote in Detroit, which is in Wayne County. Democrats argue that this disenfranchises the large black voter population in Detroit. Democrats also argue that this only delays the inevitable, as Biden has a 148,000 vote lead in Michigan, and Wayne County is broadly Democratic due to the big city of Detroit. Sequoia, what is your take on this breaking news?
Well, it's interesting that there appears to be a bit of a hiccup, but it does appear that this hiccup really will not have a large effect on the outcome of Michigan, let alone the national election. So, of course, while I hope that the legal process is followed as intended, I do recognize that this will likely serve to drum up Trump's base of voters who still think that he has a path to victory, even though this news really does not indicate in any way that Trump will be able to win the election.
All right. Dustin, do you have anything to add to this section of news?
Yeah, Sequoia said exactly my own thoughts, that this could fuel the fires of discontent. So it'll be interesting to see how this information will be used by either side.
Yeah, definitely. Backpedaling a little bit back to the original topic at hand, which was election disinformation. What was your take, Sequoia, on when OANN aired the video on YouTube and YouTube only demonetized it and didn't take it down and didn't fact check it initially? Do you think that there should be more fact checking on websites such as YouTube to prevent disinformation such as this?
Well, I think this raises a very large and very difficult question. Is it the role of sites like YouTube, Facebook, etc., to control the content that is being spread on their platforms? The whole point of these platforms is to give people a voice. And one could argue that people should be able to say whatever they want, just in the sense that my legal right to say whatever I want is protected by the First Amendment when I speak using my voice. But these are private companies that are beholden to, or actually private companies that are publicly listed on the stock market. So they are beholden to their stockholders. They're also beholden to advertisers. And as a result of these dependencies, they have an obligation to ensure that the content is largely socially acceptable so that these advertisers and stockholders are willing to buy in. But I digress. As it stands specifically for YouTube and election misinformation, my knee-jerk reaction is that yes, YouTube should do what it should to crack down on misinformation, only because the stakes are so high. With civil unrest brewing in America, any further escalation of tensions and discrepancies between information sets that different political parties are working with, this will only make things worse. This will only further divide our country.
Yeah, and to switch a little bit, but somewhat stay on topic, we're going to go to our field reporter, Jacob, who's going to be talking about the presidential switch and the transition of power from Trump to Biden.
Hey, Gordon, thanks so much. So what we're seeing here post the results of the 2020 presidential election coming out is we've seen the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, if you will, all basically launch a series of lawsuits nationwide, right, in all swing states possible. And what they're doing here is trying to put as many blockages as possible between Biden's administration coming in and a peaceful and succinct transition of power. Now, we haven't really seen this before recently in American history. In 2016, President Obama was cordial towards President Donald Trump, and before that, in the elections prior, usually the candidate who lost would come forward and congratulate the winning candidate on running a successful campaign and wishing them the best luck. Senator John McCain did this when President Obama first won. So what we're seeing here is a unusual trend, to say the least, and it does set a worrying precedent for American democracy. It remains to be seen what effect President Donald Trump's lawsuits will actually have on a nationwide scale in terms of the impact on the election. It is possible that he could flip one or two states that he needs. That said, it won't be enough to actually change the tide of the election into his favor.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting what's going on, especially with what you're talking about and how he's putting like roadblocks, as you stated, to make the transition of power harder for Biden. Thank you for your reporting, Jacob, for tonight.
Thanks so much, Gordon.
Now we're going to bring things back and reel it into more local news, and we're going to talk about the Hartford gun violence. Hartford is experiencing a surge in shootings recently, which surpassed nearly a 6-year high. With a count of 190 plus shootings in 2020 alone, Mayor Luke Bronin and police officials have dispatched a task force of 15 veteran officers, detectives, and field reporters in hopes of slowing the number of deaths by the end of 2020. With the numbers as high as they nearly were 2 months away from the new year, citizens are both outraged by the endless violence and saddened by the losses of each death. In an effort to reduce retaliation and strengthen bonds with its community, a new group called Compass Peace Builders has been created. The group has been hosting public events that stimulate the use of coping skills for individuals most affected by the shootings. The group's most recent event was held at the Dunkin' Donuts Park that included live classes such as yoga, painting, and jewelry making. As a result, anti-violence groups took notice, and both Bronin acknowledged that the COVID-19 pandemic and court limitations have contributed to the spike. State officials also addressed the larger community on the issue. Governor Lamont has stated, quote, "The state is here to provide support where we can, especially when it comes to public safety." So it's kind of an interesting correlation here, how we see that the lockdowns of COVID are actually increasing violence, especially in areas such as Hartford. Dustin, do you have any reasoning or any speculation as to why or how that these lockdowns could be increasing gun violence when people are supposed to be locked up, being safe from the virus?
This is just mere speculation, but I have to imagine that the amount of isolation that is going on is preventing people from interacting with the same amount of people that they are used to. It is the interaction with others that teaches us and ingrains in us a sense of empathy and sympathy with our fellow man and woman. When that is decreased, do we lose our sense of sympathy and empathy with others, and how does that begin to affect our moral decisions as well as our legal ones, leading to fatal consequences?
Yeah, definitely. Sequoia, do you have anything to weigh in on how violence is spiking with the lockdowns?
Yeah, this actually makes a lot of sense intuitively to me. Violence is the sort of behavior that we see very frequently when humans are disrupted from their normal activities that they need for their physical and mental health. So it's certainly a very concerning side effect of the pandemic and the lockdowns that follow. It's taking a toll on the mental health of our country. And I am concerned to see violence on the rise, especially since overall violent crime has been on a downturn for decades now. I am hopeful that as we work more towards developing a vaccine and protecting Americans from COVID-19, we will see this violence abate. We will see things return to the trend of decreasing violence that we were seeing before. But as it stands now, this is just another chilling reminder that the coronavirus pandemic is having huge, worrying implications for our society.
Yeah. Dustin, I want to ask you something else as well regarding the situation. So there are groups that are helping people cope with the trauma of losing a loved one due to the violence, but now Connecticut has increased their lockdowns and has increased their restrictions. Do you think that this is going to have an impact on the groups and their ability to help those who are affected?
If the going theory is that this increase of shootings is the result of the lockdown. Further lockdowns then logically would lead to more shootings, which is just a greater stress for these groups to have to help out our fellow citizens with. Supporting these groups is probably one of the best ways that we can help support our fellow nutmeggers.
Yeah, definitely. Sequoia, do you have any other things you would like to add on top of this discussion?
No, I think the two of you have summed it up beautifully. I look forward to a future in Connecticut and America when we don't need to be cooped indoors and we are able to keep our streets safe.
Yes, 100%. Now, switching topics a little bit, we would like to talk about the Eversource Energy Company, what it has done in the event of power outages and its effect on the Connecticut residents. Let's take a look.
Eversource, New England's largest energy provider, has found itself in the middle of controversy.
Eversource, first founded in 1966, has served New England customers for over 50 years. They have over 8,000 employees within 3 states, a staple company for electricity that millions rely on. In 2018, Eversource had been in the news for controversy regarding billing increases and withholding information regarding the shutoff of customers' power. In 2020, the company finds itself in the center of new problems once again, highlighting the quality of their work in comparison to recent price increases. Customers are criticizing Eversource for the inconsiderate increase of bills during the COVID-19 pandemic. The energy company argued the increase was agreed upon months ago. Shortly after the bill increase, Tropical Storm Isaias hit the Northeast hard, leaving hundreds of thousands without power. Customers were outraged by the lack of service and communication they received from Eversource.
Mayor Mark Bowden of Danbury, Connecticut, was not pleased with the response of Eversource to the tropical storm in his city.
We have an organization that's a monopoly in this state whose CEO makes $19 million a year, and they can't keep the lights on, they can't prepare for a storm, and oh, by the way, they can't even figure out how to keep your rates low.
After the storm, Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut asked James Judge, the CEO of Eversource, to resign, stating they had failed to manage a proper response to their customers. Connecticut Governor Ned Lamont had also indicated that Eversource is too large of a company. He had this to say about Eversource's response to Isaias.
I want them to feel the sense of urgency that we felt when there's an outage. I want to make sure that we put every person we can on the table to make sure we're taking care of this. To Eversource's credit, we've got already 200,000 people back up, and that's not good enough for me.
Eversource President of Regional Electric Operations Craig Hallstrom defended his company in response to the backlash. According to Hallstrom, Tropical Storm Isaias caused 25% more damage than Superstorm Sandy and Tropical Storm Irene. The men and women working at Eversource restored power in 33% less time.
Lawmakers are now proposing a bill that would require electric companies 48 hours to restore the power. If the power was not back within 2 days, they would have to pay each customer $100 a day. This is Devin Trotta, WCSU News, Election Connection.
So we see here the mayor himself is saying the company has gotten very, very big, and there's a lot of public backlash pertaining to Eversource. Sequoia, do you have anything you'd like to add about this topic or anything you'd like to mention?
Yeah, Gordon, I'm struck by the tension that we see between this private company, Eversource, and the government's duty to ensure that Connecticut's residents have reliable access to electricity. Eversource, as a private company, of course, is subject to less scrutiny, less regulation than a government entity might be. And that may be part of why they found themselves in this situation where the CEO is making $19 million a year, but their response here has been seen as largely insufficient. I mean, we've got protests that we've seen against Eversource. Customers are really unhappy. So I'm just interested to learn more about the relationship between the private sector and satisfying these core basic needs like electricity for residents, and what governments can do to ensure that residents get the services they need and get them consistently and reliably.
Yeah. Coming up next, we have Brian Emro, who is going to be discussing the Republican minority and voter fraud exposed.
Thanks, Gordon. Trump's voter claims, which are routinely censored by social media outlets, are still going viral. One of the most widespread instances of alleged voter fraud stemmed claims from that dead people in Michigan's ballots are being cast still. The claim was debunked after local officials informed correspondents at PolitiFact that ballot was actually attributed to the father of the individual who casted the ballot. The voter was intended for, whose name is William, shares a name and address with his deceased father. The ballot was actually casted by William the son, who was mistaken for his father, and it was counted for William's father, which is the source of the viral screenshot from the Michigan Voter Information Center. There was also a widespread suggestion that the computers in Michigan had undergone a glitch in the voting counting software and resulted in thousands of votes being counted for Biden instead of Trump. Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, who shared that initial mistake, was it was only in one county, not the purported 47 counties that Trump and Republican Senator Ted Cruz had claimed. With no evidence that similar incidents occurred elsewhere in the key swing state, Secretary Benson claims that it was quickly identified and corrected. Back to you, Gordon.
Thank you, Brian, for all of your reporting this evening that you've done for us, and we'll be getting back to you more later.
Thanks, Gordon.
This is Election Connection, Western Connecticut State University's live news and election coverage for 2020. I'm Gordon Mochia. Tonight, we're looking at this year's election and what it means for Connecticut and the nation.
And I'm Sequoia Lowe. We are streaming live over YouTube, WCSU Election Connection, wcsu.edu/live, and WXCI 91.7 FM Danbury. You can also tweet us at ElectionCT.
And my name is Dustin Martin, and now we are going to be talking about technology, social media, and how it pertains to our culture.
Yes, and one of the new social media platforms that have come out that have been controversial in nature is the social media platform known as TikTok. The president has said very interesting things about it and has attempted to ban it in the United States. It has been banned in other countries because of its controversy. And at the same time, it is one of the most popular social media apps out on the markets right now. Dustin, why do you think that Trump was so against TikTok as a social media app and it being widespread?
You know, there's lots of, hearsay that Trump has a personal problem with it because its users have been notoriously anti-Trump. However, his problem with TikTok is much bigger. It stems back to his problem with China.
Yeah,
Donald
and we
Trump
have
has a big problem with China.
We have a lot more about that. Let's take a look.
TikTok. It's a video sharing social media app that has taken the world by storm, having been downloaded over 2 billion times across the globe. Users share videos of themselves lip-syncing, dancing, singing, and just about anything else, with the common goal of making a person's day.
We may be banning TikTok.
The U.S. is reportedly weighing a ban on TikTok.
It's an app that attracts the attention of 50 million Americans daily. And one of these Americans thinks that when it comes to TikTok, there is a giant red flag.
China. Right.
China.
TikTok is owned and operated by the Chinese tech company called ByteDance.
They say because TikTok is owned by a Chinese company that information, personal and private data of American users is being harvested by the company and then given directly to the Chinese government.
Do you recommend that people download that app on their phones tonight, tomorrow, anytime currently?
Only if you want your private information in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party.
It's all the data that goes into those mobile apps that kids have so much fun with and seems so convenient. It goes right to servers in China, right to the Chinese military, the Chinese Communist Party.
The position of the Trump administration. U.S. operations of TikTok must be controlled by an American company or the app will be banned. On August 6, 2020, Donald Trump signed an executive order for TikTok to be banned on September 20th. In addition to concerns over digital privacy, Donald Trump accused TikTok of being a tool of the Chinese government to spread misinformation and fake news. Microsoft was in early talks to purchase the service of not only TikTok in America, but also Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. However, on September 14th, their bid was rejected by ByteDance.
Multiple reports citing sources familiar with the deal say TikTok's owner has chosen tech giant Oracle as its technology partner.
The initial proposal was rejected by the U.S. government, especially when it came to the exact ownership stakes and the control of TikTok's content providing algorithm. From day to day, TikTok's fate hung in the balance, and the ban date of September 20th loomed closer. Until
we have some very big news on TikTok.
Oracle will own 12.5% of the new company to be called TikTok Global and will manage all of TikTok's cloud computing business in the United States. Walmart is going to be TikTok's official e-commerce partner, coming out of the deal with 7.5% stake ownership and a seat for Walmart's CEO on TikTok's global board of directors.
It will have nothing to do with China.
The Chinese-based company, ByteDance, will own 80% of TikTok Global. Question now, will TikTok change, or will it remain the same?
It'll continue to be named TikTok as it was all along, and that's it. I have given the deal my blessing. If they get it done, that's great. If they don't, that's okay too. But it's a great deal for America, and very interesting.
So we see here with the social media app that it was in grave danger, and then it was saved by companies such as Oracle and Walmart. Dustin, do you have any updates on the package or any other remarks you'd like to add, considering you're the one that made it?
There's this overall problem, as I was saying, that Donald Trump has with China. It is in his sincere belief that China's gain is the equivalent of America's loss. TikTok is not the first Chinese company that has received this treatment from the incumbent president. Huawei, which is a cell phone manufacturer based out of China, has also received lots of blocks from their ability to make commerce in America, all stemming from the same issues: concerns over privacy and worry that China is going to become an economic power that could dwarf or hurt America's status in the world.
Mm-hmm. And I know that there was a big scare with TikTok when it first came out, and this talk of getting it banned was made popular, was that because it's a Chinese company, when you create an account with it, your information goes onto a Chinese server, and that they have your information, whether it be your first name, last name, email address, phone number, whatever it may be. They have that information of you, and it's stored in a database, and the argument was they don't know what you're doing with that information. They could be doing anything with it. Sequoia, do you think that that is an initial security concern now that American companies own TikTok?
Yes, it's very difficult to tell exactly how far these privacy concerns extend. Of course, it's a very specialized field, investigating these apps and what information they are and are not sending. And to some extent, we just don't have the ability to tell where our information is going. It's all very nebulous and hidden from us and difficult. So, of course, I would argue Americans have a right to privacy, both from private American corporations and from the Chinese government. But is that actually being respected? I don't think so, but it's difficult to say for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And on the topic of technology, technological innovations in medicine has been coming up substantially lately with the new thing called Neuralink. Let's take a look.
From electric cars to commercial space travel, Elon Musk has a fantastical sci-fi vision of the future, and 2020 is no different. In July of 2020, Elon and the team at Neuralink have announced the latest and most realistic iteration of the device. Elon Musk's new technology aims to bring affordable relief to those who are suffering with his latest innovation, Neuralink. Musk has set out to solve major brain and spine injuries with a tiny device that would be implemented in your skull.
Our goal is to solve important spine and brain problems with a seamlessly implanted device.
Almost everyone will suffer from a brain or spine problem in their lifetime. Problems such as memory or hearing loss, extreme pain, depression or anxiety, even blindness. An implantable device may be able to solve these issues. These issues stem from neurons firing in the brain, and correcting these electrical pulses may be able to fix these problems.
The neurons are like wiring, and you kind of need an electronic thing to solve an electronic problem.
The current medical standard is far from effective. The multi-electrode array, or the Utah array, is a large box with rigid metal wires that is put into your skull through an air hammer. It is large, clunky, visible, and risks infection. The Neuralink attempts to correct those issues and progress the technology.
So we want to radically improve this by multiple orders of magnitude, improve it by a factor of 100, then 1,000, then 10,000.
The device is coin-sized and shaped. It is about 23 by 8 millimeters, and when it is inserted, nobody can notice the device. It stimulates the brain with varying electrical charges depending on the issue it's resolving. The brain does not typically accept intruders. The brain and the pool of liquid that it sits in is acidic and typically dissolves metals that try to penetrate it. Electronic therapy is also risky. The goal is to send an electronic current to a single neuron without hitting any others. While there's criticism among the scientific community about using tech to solve a biological issue, the FDA has granted the start of testing, and pigs that have already been tested on remain happy and healthy after months of the Neuralink.
Medicine is evolving rapidly in 2020 to pursue a vaccine to the coronavirus. However, the antivirus medicine is not the only advancement that is occurring. The Neuralink technology, if successful, will rapidly improve the quality of life for hundreds of thousands of people.
I'm Jeff Hess with WCSU News Election Connection.
Elon Musk definitely has some interesting ideas, to say the least, and when it comes to inventing things, he's the one to do it. Recently, there has been a SpaceX manned launch with a fully manned spaceship under his company SpaceX that successfully launched the ISS recently, which was an achievement of his also. But now he's trying to branch into the medicinal field of allowing technology to help people. Sequoia, do you think that this could be potentially life-changing, life-saving, or do you think that it's something that should be kind of avoided?
Well, if we take Elon Musk at his word, and he says that this really is possible and within the realm of what we can accomplish in the near future, then I think Mr. Musk is about to see many dollars line his pockets. The communities that serve to benefit from this and see the curing of their disabilities are going to be drawn to this technology like a moth to a light, and Mr. Musk will be rewarded financially for this for sure. But I'm not sure if this will actually pan out. Elon Musk has been known to take on very ambitious technological projects, and we've seen some success in these with Tesla Motors, with SpaceX, but not all of his endeavors have proved fruitful, so I will believe it when I see it.
Yeah, and when we do see it, it is going to be quite interesting to say the least. And on the topic of seeing things, people have been turning to esports, which is a new form of entertainment that is taking the storm by nation, especially with the coronavirus pandemic. Let's take a further look into that.
Competitive gaming, also known as esports, is becoming more popular during this pandemic. These competitions can vary in size, from small brackets at a game store to professionals playing in massive arenas. Prior to COVID-19, esports existed in isolation from traditional sports. However, when traditional leagues like the National Hockey League and NASCAR were put on pause, video games provided a new avenue to explore. Viewership for NASCAR's Texas Live event, held on iRacing, brought in 1.34 million viewers on Fox, and many more started watching iRacing on Twitch.tv. Throughout the pandemic, video game streaming sites like Twitch have been on the rise. Video games such as Dota 2, Fortnite, League of Legends, and many others have gained popularity in the April of 2020, just at the start of the lockdown in most states. We asked Mark Mencher, a veteran of the game industry for over 30 years, about the sudden rise.
In times of stress, economic downturns, medical issues like this, any kind of crisis, people want entertainment so they can escape.
Although video games in general are rising, not everyone in the gaming industry is experiencing such increases. We asked William Acorn, who organized tournaments here in Danbury before the pandemic, for his input.
Everyone's just kind of at home now, just kind of waiting, just biding their time.
Since the pandemic, local tournaments have paused in-person play. Some groups have moved tournaments online, but online play brings challenges.
So it's definitely affecting how they're playing right now, just because, like, best case scenario, you get an additional 15 frames of lag. That's a lot less things that you can react to in game, so you have to plan your game plan completely differently.
Players can find themselves facing lag, where commands the player inputs feel delayed. This can cause issues for games such as Super Smash Bros., where a 60th of a second matters. Lag, however, is not the main concern players have.
Oh man, everyone was always saying that they miss each other, and I miss everybody too.
When not in person, the players are not able to connect and socialize with their fellow gamers. Many of these players motivate and train each other, but rely on in-person interaction to do so. This issue is one that goes beyond the local events. Mencher believes all multiplayer games are facing this issue.
The games are designed to be played, when you're in a group of people and there's the excitement and the energy. That's part of what it's all about.
Shortly after the start of the pandemic, the company behind Dota 2 had to postpone their largest yearly event. Normally this event would bring in massive viewership in August, but with the delay, a spike that would normally occur in the viewership charts is missing. Competitive gaming has found its way into the public mind. Traditional sports experience a detour into an unknown realm. New faces are picking up live streaming as a hobby, while tournaments both large and small await a return to in-person play. Many different types of gamers are waiting for what the future holds. This is Calvin Savoya, WCSU News, Election Connection.
And some minor updates to that news package that we just watched. Valve, the developer of Dota 2, has tentatively announced an August 2021 start date for the International, which is the Dota 2 International Tournament. And League of Legends have completed their international tournaments with no positive cases of COVID-19. The tournament used a bubble system similar to the NBA and the NHL. So we see here that there was a esports tournament that is one of the most popular competitive games on the internet right now. And there were no positive cases of COVID from using the bubble system. Dustin, do you think that in the near future, a system similar to this could take place for tournaments?
I think so, especially for tournaments. You gave the perfect example. The NBA successfully pulled off their bubble. Not a single case was reported, and they were able to hold months of play, restoring normalcy for many of its fans. And that is something that I think could be used again to restore normalcy for these esports players. It's an awful stereotype often attributed to players of video games that they often spend too much time not socializing inside, when this package shows that quite the opposite is true. Their social life is being as disrupted by COVID as any other aspect of life. So a bubble, as seen effective before, could be used effectively again to help restore normalcy and balance.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting also about esports is although the tournaments are very epic, they're great, they put on a good show, esports, because it is electric, is something that can be done at home. And they could, in theory, just have one team on one side of the room, one team on the other side of the room, with a few cameras set up, and have the entire event live streamed instead of having people there to potentially save costs. Sequoia, do you see this as a potential option?
Yes, I do. But I want to point out how what we've seen with Dota 2, with League of Legends, is really the best case scenario for an esport as far as how it would survive a pandemic like this. Because there are other esports that do not adapt as well to online environments. And there are also esports like Super Smash Bros., which we saw in the news story, which do not have big money behind them organizing events, but rather are strictly grassroots scenes. And these grassroots scenes aren't able to invest the resources to create a bubble. So it looks like Valve might be able to pull something off in person here. But as it stands for many of these other esports, online is going to be their best bet. And depending on the online systems for those games, that may not cut it.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have for the show tonight. We've covered everything from the presidential election aftermath to technological changes that are taking the nation by storm and that are shaping our future. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of your night.
And I'm Sequoia Lowe. Thank you so much to all of our viewers. It's been a pleasure speaking with my fellow anchors and sharing the news with all of you tonight. Stay safe.
And I am Dustin Martin, signing off and saying goodnight. And please join us again next year for Election Connection, hosted by Western Connecticut State University.